Good evening. And if you're just tuning in, you are listening live to the Angel Rock with your host, me, Lorilei Potvin. And you're listening to it on 105.3 FM out of Mississippi and 107.7 out of the beautiful city of New Orleans, Louisiana. And this is UFO Paranormal and United Public Radio Network, or we like to just call it UPRN. We have two names. And so we're glad to have you here. I have an amazing guest for y'all this evening. But a little bit first, you guys, if you've been here before, you know I got a few housekeeping things to get out of the way. But welcome, whether you've been here before or you're just coming for the first time, we're happy to have you. If you like what you see, please like, share, and subscribe. This network's been around for 25 plus years. We stream multiple shows 7 days a week. And when we're not streaming live, the archive server kicks in to pick randomly over the last 25 plus years shows, and there really is something for everybody on this network. I believe we're up to 40 hosts now and always adding new shows. So if you like it, share it and tell everybody all about it. Also, if you want to watch us on TV, we do have a TV channel for the network. We are on Roku, and I believe I don't know where we're going yet, but I think we're going to even be expanding past that in the near future. But if you want to find us on Roku, where you're going to go is to the channel store. You're going to type in UFO space P as in paranormal. There's a drop down list, and we're about the third or fourth one down. And you're looking for UFO space paranormal and United Public Radio. And that's how you can find us, and you can watch us on TV. Also, 80% of our listening audience is audio only. We do broadcast on this network to every country in the world. Potentially, it can reach it, and we do. So if you want to join in the conversation, we've got a great group of people filing in already saying hi to everybody. How you can do that, you can head over to the video portion of where you can watch if you like. You can go to UFO Paranormal and United Public Radio Network on YouTube and Facebook. I am streaming on Instagram on the Angel Rock. Hopefully they don't kick us out after an hour. I didn't see the warning tonight, so maybe they fixed that. Also, I should say that Streamer was warning us a little bit about YouTube having some streaming issues going live. So knock on wood. So if you can always head over to the Facebook channel I mentioned. I haven't shared it yet to my main profile on Facebook, but I'll do that. So where else are Canada's Most Haunted? And we're also streaming to my YouTube, which is the Angel Rock with Lorilei Potvin. And we are streaming it, I know, to my amazing guest that I'm about to introduce on her YouTube channel, which I believe is under third_verse. And you guys are going to want to go to her channel. Believe me, you are going to want to go to her channel. I just finished watching one of her podcasts and I was like, wow. So let me tell you about my guest and how I found this guest. Was, as you know, and I talk about many of the personal things I experience in life and what have you, I follow true crime at different times. And there is a favorite of my channels the channels that I watch. And I've mentioned this channel many times before, Surviving the Survivor. Sorry, my mouth doesn't want to work. Surviving the Survivor with Joel Waldman, and sometimes his mother Carm is on there with him. I know the COE or his beautiful wife also has done some broadcasting on there. It's a fantastic true crime channel. And if you do follow it, there's been a big case with Lori and Chad Daybell, or Lori Vallow as well. And that's how I got to see who Megan was, in a way, because there was a lot of wisdom coming through because when she was talking about this case, because she is the first cousin to Lori Vallow. But that's not who Megan is. And you guys are going to want to hear who Megan is and what she's all about. Believe me, you're going to want to. So let me read a little bit of her bio. So Megan Connor is the mother of 6 spectacular humans and a breaker of generational trauma cycles. She has spent the last 10 years overcoming the effects of childhood SA. And if you don't know what that is, we're going to be careful because we're on YouTube and it kind of triggers things on YouTube, but you'll figure it out. And other abusive relationships and cycles. She's the host on the Midlife Revolution podcast. That was one I was referencing on her YouTube channel, and author of I Walked Through Fire to Get Here, which was written to give support and hope to other survivors. Megan is passionate about helping people make small changes that make their lives better every day. And I know she's also been the survivor of, I'll say, SEXUAL and Trafficking. And so you'll be able to spell that, I'm sure. But welcome, Megan. I'm so glad to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was great to have a little Surviving the Survivor connection.
It was. Well, we don't get to talk to you like this, but you know what it was? Even though you were talking about something that's really devastating, obviously, I could see how much wisdom you had and spirituality coming through, because you really have made a big transition. So, what I do first, let's say hi to everybody, because I know we're going to get talking, and then we're going to really get into this. So just let me go up to the top here. So we got Z Sun Dragon, or Kevin, as we call him. Kevin's here early tonight. He was the first one. Welcome. He says, hi, Megan. Kathy Hanley Little says, hi, Lorilei and Megan. Michelle Wilfong says, hi, everyone. Jennifer M. as well. Stephanie K. is here. And Michelle's just saying hi to everybody else. So what I do with most people is I start at the beginning. Because I always say embrace all of it. It makes us who we are today. But we all start somewhere, and you have an interesting beginning. So feel free to start wherever you like. But I mean, the transition you've made to where you are today from the background you've come from, are you comfortable sharing that?
Yeah, of course. It's a bit of a slog. It's a
Okay.
little bit of a long story. Whenever people say start at the beginning, I always say, well, the earth was forming. Well, that's too far back. That's a little Bugs Bunny joke for those of you who are old enough.
I know Bugs Bunny.
Well, I was born into a very strict LDS or Mormon family. I am the second child of 4. I have an older brother, a younger brother, and a younger sister. Okay. And my dad was in the Air Force, so we moved a lot growing up for the first few years of my life. And he got out of the Air Force and then went to work for Citibank, and their credit card operation is in South Dakota. And so we ended up moving there.
Okay.
So we moved there when I was about 7 years old. And my mom got a job for the first time there. And her job started early. And I think she and my dad might have been sharing a car or something like that. So she hired a babysitter that lived one street over from us to watch us kids before the bus came in the morning. And then we went there after school when the bus would drop us off there. And then my parents would pick us up and we would go home. It was while I was in that house that I was trafficked. It was the babysitter and her husband who were running the operation in their basement. And they took graphic pictures and videos of myself and the other children who were there. And they sold the pictures. I know that because there was one man who I saw come in, and I saw money change hands, and that's how that took place. And the difficulty really, as horrible as all of that is, I grew up, I was raised to really respect adults and respect their authority. And so I believed everything that every adult told me and took it at face value. And in order to get a child to do the things that they were asking us to do, they had to really program us in a specific way. And so the message that I received is that this is what all children do. And especially girls, this is what girls are made for. And this is what everyone wants from you. And no one would even interact with you if they didn't want this from you. And it's your responsibility to make sure that whatever I ask for, that you do it right away. You don't ask questions. And if you ever tell anybody, they're probably going to be really angry with you for even saying anything, and they're not going to love you anymore. So that was kind of the programming that I absorbed as a young child. And it was, I took that with me for a long time. I carried those messages with me. And it was confusing because I got some conflicting messages from my family and some conflicting messages from the church. But this programming, because it was installed in such a traumatic way, was like my baseline operating system. It was like always this, but if there's something else, you can look at that as long as this doesn't override it. Does that make sense? So
Absolutely. Yep. Mhm.
yeah, so trying to decipher all of that messaging, I spent a lot of time confused as a child. And understandably, during those years, I did the best that I could to dissociate from the really terrible things that were happening. I still had normal everyday interactions with people, and that's something that I think a lot of people either misunderstand, or there's sort of like a narrative that in order to be trafficked, you have to be taken from your home and kidnapped in some way. But I slept in my bed every single night. I went
Mhm.
to school, I went to church, I had normal interactions with friends. I played with the neighborhood kids.
Mhm.
In all ways, my life was normal, except for those times when I was in the basement. And so, and I, of course, didn't tell anybody because I didn't want to lose the love of my friends and family members.
Well,
So
plus
I
you
kept
almost feel like
it
you're going to get in trouble. And I have been
mhm,
there at a very young age myself.
mhm,
And your story really touched me. And I didn't mean to stop in there, but unless you've been through this yourself, and I resonated with so many things in your recent podcast about being a people pleaser. And like,
mhm,
exactly, never mind as children from the age of 0 to 7. We are like sponges. Like, so I
mhm,
can see why that programming where you would spend a good portion of your time, right, with, never mind at school, but they're your caregivers during the week, and the
mhm.
ingrainment of it all, never mind the trauma of it all, too. I can see why that would sort of be the base operating system from behind, and exactly you disassociate from what you've been through. Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, and also, not just dissociating from what actually happened, but just dissociating in general. I started exhibiting behaviors of wanting to escape all the time. I told lots of tall
Mhm.
tales, and I tried to run away from home a couple of times. And lots of people always ask me, like, "Didn't your parents see the signs? Didn't they know? Like, weren't they involved enough to
Our
know what was
parents were
going on?"
never raised to, like, mine happened in my own home. But
Yeah.
the thing is that, and then when I meant about the dissociation, I kept getting flashbacks and flashbacks and flashbacks, and you wonder why you are the way you are. Like for me, and people find it very difficult to believe, but I was so painfully shy. I was always scared, and I was always hiding. Like when people
Mm,
came over, and I didn't want to say anything. And I always say, you never know what goes on behind closed doors because you don't. It looks very
yeah.
normal to the outside. So I
Yeah.
hear. So I didn't mean
Yeah.
to interrupt, but I wanted to add that because I really do get what you're saying. And if you've been through this before, you do.
Yeah, yeah, and
Important.
our parents, like you said, our parents were not trained to
Mm-mm.
recognize these signs and symptoms,
Mhm.
especially back at that time. It wasn't something people talked about, and we were
Never.
always scared of the boogeyman in the van that would run around the
Yeah,
street, you know,
with the
like, it
candy.
was the white van with the dark windows and stranger danger.
Yeah,
Nobody ever warned us about the people that we knew.
never.
Back
And you
then,
were
it
taught
was
not to
somebody.
question your elders. Like
Yeah.
exactly, I wasn't raised LDS. I was raised in a Roman Catholic family, but the same thing. Your elders were your authority. You were taught to be polite, especially as a female. You did not speak back. You and constantly, speaking back or speaking up about what you wanted or what you needed. You were being selfish, very
Right,
selfish, and thinking
right.
everybody else but yourself. Sorry, go ahead.
Exactly. No, no, you're right. And that is one of the reasons why you don't speak up, because you upset the apple cart of the family system. And my family was already a very volatile, unsafe place to be. It was very
Mhm.
strict, and it was made very clear to us that in order to be acceptable, we had to fit in this little box. And here I was, in Mormonism, the age of 8 is when you get baptized into the church. And there's a lot of messaging around when you get baptized, you're the cleanest person in the entire church because you just got baptized and you're perfectly clean. And there's like your sins are washed away. And being 7 when that happened, I already felt that I was too broken and too dirty to get baptized. But when I did, I was kind of disappointed to not see the water turn black when I got
Oh,
baptized, because I literally thought it was going to take all of that ick away
poor
from me.
thing.
Um, and then, getting baptized at 8, and the message was that when you do something wrong, then you need to repent in order to be that clean again. And I remember thinking, like, I got baptized, and then the very next week I was like, now I have to repent, and what do I do? And wishing I could just get baptized all over again, instead of having to go through the process of like constantly sinning and then constantly coming back. And I did totally feel like it was sinful. I felt like it was my fault. And I felt like I should have been strong enough to speak up if I didn't want to do those things. And all of those thoughts went through my young mind at the time. And if you think about childhood development, a child of 7 or 8 years old is really not capable of differentiating from their parents
No.
because of the survival instinct that is so ingrained in us.
Mm-hmm.
We need our parents literally for survival and for love and belonging. And so in order for us to make any choice that's different than a choice our parents would want us to make, or a choice that they made, it really is impossible for a child of that young age, which is why I speak up so much about informed consent in the church, because these kids are really indoctrinated into this way of life, and they don't really get another option until you're much older. So, but that's a story for another time, or at least we could come back to
I
it
forgot
later.
to tell you. I just realized as we were talking, I always forget something without my checklist. And if you're new here, I will tell you guys this a little bit about myself. I am a Canadian, a psychic medium, crystal Reiki energy healer, Akashic Records practitioner, spiritual teacher and mentor, registered nurse. I'm also a budding animal communicator, well versed in near-death experiences, having had one as a toddler myself and studied it for over 40 years professionally and personally. And well versed, not by choice, was never looking for it, but it found me the paranormal. And we have shared our own story on the Travel Channel's Paranormal Survivor. It's in season 4, episode 9. Sorry, I forgot to tell. And Megan and I have never talked. We've just communicated via email. So I apologize for jumping in there, but I forgot that. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Thank you for sharing that with me. And it sort of informs like what I already know about you, through
Yeah.
email. So this is great. I love these connections. This is
Yes.
wonderful.
And I was, as you were talking, I'm thinking, oh crap, I forgot that part, because William says, OMG, browsing, and I found Megan again. And then he says, hello, people. And somebody else, we got SP Mama 444 says, oh, wow, this is new. I'll listen while making dinner. So, yes. And Destiny also said, oh, gross hearing this, because we are much more aware now, in this day and age. And like you said, you're going to move forward from this story, but it's important, I think, to share where you're coming from and you're just incredible. Like your last podcast, I literally finished it about 10 minutes before we went live and we connected. And I went, wow, like you've got so much wisdom. I could see that even on the true crime podcast as well. You've really got a lot of wisdom to
Thank
share
you.
with people. So let's move forward. Where do you want to go with
Yeah,
this?
sure. I just want to say a shout out to my channel members who are coming over.
I see
Stephanie
them. I can
K
smell the little clip there. So I'm
yeah,
glad.
exactly. Destiny, SP Mama, William. These are my people.
And we
So
got
thank
Julie
you for being
Evans.
here.
She's over in the UK. It's 12. It's about, what time is it over there, Julie? 11. Let's see. It is 6:30. Yeah, it's about 11:30 over there, right? So we're
Late
glad you
night.
could join us too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we lived in South Dakota for 4 years. And so the trafficking happened the entire time that we were there. And luckily, my dad got a new job and we moved away. So there never had to be any kind of big confrontation, which is good on some levels, but it's also troublesome in some ways because I never dealt with any of that. I just kept it a secret for my whole life and didn't talk about it at all until I was probably in my 30s. So dissociation sort of became my MO. It was the way I operated my life. We moved away from there and we lived in Connecticut. My dad worked in New York City and he would take the train back and forth.
Okay.
And I had some relatively really, really good times there. My middle school and high school years, I had a nice group of friends. I had a couple of really nice boyfriends. I had lots of experiences performing and traveling and fell in love with New York City. That became sort of like my home away from home.
So you're a musician, aren't you? Because the story you were talking about with the piano in your last podcast on your YouTube channel, And I was so proud to even hear. I was clapping when I heard you able to stand up, but I know we're going to get to that. So
Yeah, well, I did start playing the piano when I was 5 years old. I was
wow.
always musical. My mom said that whenever I passed the piano, I would always try to play something, and she eventually got me into lessons. And
Okay.
I sang from a very young age, and so that piano did sort of become an escape for me. I would just play for hours and hours and hours because I knew nobody would disturb me, and I didn't have to listen to yelling or criticism or sarcasm or anything. It was a way for me to shut all of that out. Um, so, well, I was about to say I did have a lot of really great experiences during
Sorry.
that time. No, you're fine. But it
We're
was
filling
also
in the
a time.
holes.
It was also a time that was really tough from the standpoint of I had a deep knowing that there was something really, really wrong with me, but I didn't really. I had little fragments of memories, but I didn't remember everything. So I didn't really understand why I felt so broken all the time. And looking back, I definitely see that I had like chronic depression throughout that entire time. And on top of that, our family system was just very volatile. My parents had their own issues going on and their own things they hadn't dealt with. And they sort of passed that on to us, and we passed it to our younger siblings. And it was really a toxic environment. There was very little, it wasn't a safe place to express emotions or to have emotions. And it wasn't safe, as I was talking about, to differentiate from my parents. And I'm so much not like them that I really had to deny so many parts of myself in order to fit into Mormonism and in order to fit into my family system. And you can only do that for so long before you start to lose who you are as a person. And I really felt lost when I left home. I was 17 when I graduated from high school, just because of where my birthday falls. And so I ended up going to my first semester of college at the University of Connecticut when I was 17. I turned 18, in October when I had been there already for a while. I was away from home for the first time. I had no idea what I was doing. Nobody had ever sat me down and said, this is how you do college. I had this assumption that I had to be as busy in college as I had been in high school. And so I thought I had to be in class all day, and then I would study in the evening and do homework. So I signed up for 21 credits my first
Oh my
semester.
gosh.
Um,
I
I
went to
also,
university. We call it university in Canada, but
mhm.
it's college. But 21. Oh my goodness. My nursing caseload, like first year, wasn't even that heavy. Holy cow, Megan.
Yeah, I mean, that meant that I was in class every day from 8 a.m. to about 3 p.m., Monday through Friday. And then I additionally belonged to the choir, which we always had rehearsals and performances on the side. And then I also, because I was always worried about money, which was another like hand me down from my family system, I also got 2 part-time jobs because I thought I should be busy all the time. Like I should never have any free time at all. So I got a part-time job as an usher at the theater, which was like only when they had shows. But then I also worked at like a hamburger stand, a few hours a week, just to try and, make ends meet or, have extra money or whatever. And it was state university. It was a party school. I was a good little Mormon girl all the way up until the time that I got there. Had never, drank before, didn't know anything about how to deal with boys really. Like the boyfriends that I had in high school were very respectful and understanding and kind, and I could talk to them. It was like the boys in college, I just didn't even know what to do with them.
Yeah, I bet
And
that was like going to a different planet, wasn't it? I'm
it
sure.
really was. I really felt like I felt so lost and I had no idea what I was doing. And I was also still incredibly depressed, felt incredibly broken. And I think one of the first nights that I was there, and maybe it was just a few days after I moved in, I lived in a dorm where the bottom floor was like cafeteria stuff. And then the next floor was my floor. It was a girl's floor. Then above that was a guy's floor. And above
Wow.
that was a girl's floor. And one of the first few nights that I was there, a guy came down from the top floor from his floor and said, "Hey, we're having a party. Tomorrow's Thursday night. It's party night every Thursday night." He was like, "What do you want?" And I was like, what do you mean?
What do you mean?
He's like, we're going to the liquor store. What do you want? And I was like, oh, I don't know. I said, just like, get me something cheap, I guess. And I think I handed him like $5 or $10 or whatever. And I had no idea what I was doing. He comes back with a fifth of Jack Daniels. And
Oh my Lord.
that's what my money had bought. I had never had a drink before. And so I discovered for the first time what alcohol does to one. And I felt really good because I felt for the first time my brain sort of turned off.
Yep.
And all of those thoughts that I kept trying to push back just weren't there anymore. It was like magical. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't have to feel pain all the time. I thought it was wonderful. I thought it was the best thing in the world. So long story short, I ended up doing a lot of binging in that way. And it got myself into lots of not great situations, and ended up being the victim of a SA situation that was a person that I knew. So we would call it date R. And
Or
at the time,
grape. We can call it a grape, I think.
Grape,
That's what
yes.
you think, graping.
Yeah. But it was, I look back on that time and I just think I'm so sad for myself because it was just such an innocent thing that I stumbled into. It was a guy that it's actually kind of a sweet story if it didn't end in a dysfunctional way. I was at the theater ushering a show, and I ran into this guy who I noticed from my hometown. And like, I worked at Pizza Hut in high school and he worked at the video store next door. And he would come in every once in a while and get a pizza. And I thought he was really cute, but also probably way out of my league. I was like, boys like you don't talk to me.
In there.
Anyway, so he recognized me at the show, and he invited me to come to a party that they were having at his dorm the next night. And I felt so special that this guy would talk to me. You know, he was so cute and he was so intelligent. It looked well put together and everything. So I dressed up. My roommate let me borrow a cute little off-the-shoulder sweater, which was something that I never would have owned or worn because these are corn shoulders, if you did not know. And so I, got all dressed up and I went over there, and every door on the floor was open. Like, everybody was just out in the hallway, and you could go into any room and everybody was just talking, and there was trash can punch and all of this stuff going on. And eventually we ended up back in his room where his roommates were also there. And they were enjoying some, what is the best word for it here on YouTube? I don't know. It was a variety of...
Not alcohol, but other things maybe?
Yes. Yeah, it was not alcohol. It was a variety of smoke. Let's say that.
Oh, okay.
So they were enjoying themselves over there. I don't even know if they knew that we were there. And I just, I was with this guy, and, we were sitting there talking, and I don't really remember what happened next. I think I probably had too much. And the next thing that I remembered was, someone on top of me. And I, dissociated as I always did. My brain did a great job of protecting me. But when I woke up in the morning and I realized what had happened, I was really heartbroken because I was like, I didn't agree to this. I really like this kid. I don't necessarily think there was ill intention there. I think it was just a bad situation all the way around. I blamed myself for a really long time. And what you hear me saying now is not me trying to give him more credit than he's due. It's me being kind to myself because I know that it wasn't my fault. And I also know that if I had had the presence of mind, if I hadn't been impaired, that things probably would have gone differently. But they didn't. So I radically accept that that's what happened, and it sucked. But I was so good at dissociating by this time that I woke up. It was a Friday morning because Thursday night party. I was like, Friday morning, I have math class.
God, with a hangover, maybe?
I got dressed. I pulled my coat on. I went outside, and I just started throwing up over and over and over. And it wasn't because
it wasn't a hangover.
It wasn't a hangover.
Mhm.
I just couldn't deal with what was happening. You know, I was
You literally
totally
couldn't
traumatized.
stomach it, right? There's so
Yep,
many
literally.
things that physically we say that express emotion and on a primal basis, basically. You
Yeah,
couldn't stomach it when you start thinking about what happened and then the blaming yourself and
right.
mhm.
And also thinking about the implications of like what this means. Um, I had never done that before, so I felt like I was now, like, of course, sinning. I felt like I was, you know, the in Mormonism they call physical impropriety the sin next to M, and we'll call it muck duck for a better word,
Yeah.
because that's what Dwight Schrute calls it on The Office.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's what I felt. I felt compared to somebody who would do that to someone else. You know what I mean? And it was that. So that was just too much for me to handle. But I finished throwing up. I went to my math class. I didn't have books. I didn't have a pencil. I didn't have a backpack. I had nothing. Just my coat. And so I went in and I sat down, and the next thing I knew, class was over. I was like, oh, math class is over. It's time for music class. So I got up and I went to music class on the other side of campus. Like I was like, I don't have time to go back to my dorm and get my bag and all that stuff, but I can't miss this class, because it was like that perfectionistic tendency of mine. And so I went to my music class. And then when that was over, I went to my next class. And then when that was over, I went back to my dorm and just completely continued to dissociate. And um, I think what happened is that I was sort of in enough of a daze that the people around me knew that I was not okay. And I ended up at the medical clinic on campus.
Oh.
And all I remember is telling the front desk person that I was not okay and I didn't know what was wrong with me. And the next thing I knew, I was in a room and they were asking me to put a gown on. And I was like, they didn't want to leave me alone in the room, but I also didn't want to get dressed in front of a stranger.
Mhm.
So I dissociated again and don't remember what happened until I think it was probably the next day that my mother had come to pick me up.
Mhm.
And I don't know whether it was she or I that came up with the lie that I had mono, but that was the story that got told. She brought me home, and I spent a few days just pretending I had mono, resting, sleeping, not really talking to anybody or doing anything. And then about a week later, I just went back to school and finished the semester. Um, so again, it was one of those things where I knew if I had had a conversation with my mother about what had happened, that it would have been like, well, what were you doing out
Yeah,
on
it
a
would have been
Thursday
your
night?
fault. Yeah.
What were you doing drinking? What were you, you know, it was like, it was going to be my fault anyway. And so I was like, I already blame myself. So I'm not going to get like add to the blame by having her also blame me. So we never talked about it. Um, Yada yada. My parents moved to Texas. I ended up not going back to University of Connecticut. And um, because of what happened, I sort of checked out for the rest of the semester. And only about 6 of those credits ended up transferring for me.
That's still quite a
Because
bit.
grades were terrible.
You
It's
did
still not
you know
bad.
what? I'm just thinking, Megan, like, it oh my god, my heart is, like, breaking for you, and I know that's not why you're sharing this story. It's just the fact that to see where you are now from what you've gone through, and if you've and again, everybody's story is individual to them, but I think it just hits me so deeply because many things you said I have been in my own situation, very not the same. I'll never say my story was yours. I would never disrespect you in any way that way, but I really, really have such deep empathy for you with what you've gone through. And I really appreciate you being so honest and sharing it here because I think people can hear your story. Like William, he says, nice to meet you, Lorilei. Nice to meet you, William. He says, Megan is a very strong person and her husband is very lucky. But there's another story here, or another thing here that Kathy Henley Little shares. I can very much identify with Megan. My experiences with a family member. I was broken too. Spirituality has helped me to work through it. So I really appreciate you sharing this because I knew there's a lot of people out there that have not spoke spoke their truth yet. They've not
Mhm.
processed it or been given the opportunity. So thank you. So sorry, I didn't mean to cut in there, but I really wanted to acknowledge this.
No, that's okay. And thank you for saying that, Kathy and William. Thank you. You're kind. I wrote about my story because when I finally did get into healing, I was in a group of really wonderful women who had also been through terrible traumatic things. And what I saw happen over and over was that they would disappear out of the group and then maybe come back later, but they didn't, and none of them seemed to be getting any better. They just all seemed to be kind of in this cycle of like going to group, dropping out of group, coming back to group. And it made me so sad that when I finally did get out, I said, I don't know any other stories of women who have been where I've been and who actually got out and who are actually having a happy life. And that's the reason I tell my story. It's not for any other reason. There, you can think of a million reasons why, right? The only reason I do is because I want other survivors to know that it's not only possible to get out, but it's possible to actually have a happy life on the other side of it. And it's not just for women survivors, it's for men survivors. It's not just for SA survivors, it's for all kinds of A survivors. It's for anybody who has felt broken and doesn't think that they can get better.
You know what? And like I said, even though you were talking about true crime. I mean, Joel kept calling you, what was he calling you? The guru of surviving this fire. But no, I saw that you had so much wisdom and knowledge that I think that comes deep from within, and the amount from the story you've just shared, and I know you barely touched the tip of the iceberg, so you guys are going to have to go and buy your book. You do, because I tell you, there's a lot that's going to be in there to help all of us. But when you first tasted alcohol, and you noticed how it made you feel. I have been around people with alcohol and drug problems my whole life, professionally and personally. But the one thing I can say is there's not one person that woke up and said, what I aspire to be is an alcoholic or drug addict. Yeah. Ever, ever, ever. That's when you realize through whatever experience. So I'm so glad you shared that. And we're not going to focus on it, but I think it's important to recognize that people start to realize that the reason why people are self-medicating on many levels is because of the pain that they're in, right? And it numbs it, it takes it away. You don't have to go inside your head, right? So I'm so glad that you touched on that. So thank you.
Yeah, sure. So after getting away from the University of Connecticut, I moved down here kind of to follow my parents to San Antonio. And I ended up meeting a man who, not surprisingly, was not honest with me about who he was. We got engaged very quickly, but he was not a member of the LDS Church, so my parents were really unhappy about that. And I sort of wrestled with that too, because I'd been raised my entire life that the end all be all goal of every good Mormon girl is to get married in the temple. And you can only do that if you're marrying. First of all, you have to be worthy, and then the person you're marrying also has to be worthy. So it means that they have to be baptized, and you have to pass a 2-step interview process with 2 different ecclesiastical leaders. They literally give you a card that has a barcode on it that you have to take and scan at the temple. So I wrestled with that a lot, and I ultimately made the decision for the first time in my life that I did not want to be with that person. That was really hard for me because he threatened to end himself if I left. And, you know, there was a lot of unhealthy dynamics in that relationship, but it was mostly me being a people pleaser because that's how I was raised. So it was really hard for me to finally tell him, no, I'm not doing this, not getting married. And then about 2 weeks later, I found out that I was pregnant.
Oh, Megan.
So,
not that you regret the baby, I'm sure, but
no, definitely not. But it was heartbreaking for me because I wanted to be a mother so badly. That was really one of my big aspirations in life.
Yep.
And I didn't want it under these circumstances, though, you know. And at the time, the way that the Mormon Church dealt with that was that they sent the young woman to the unwed mother to LDS Family Services. And that was an organization whose main goal was to get unwed mothers to give up their children for adoption. And they also offered therapy services, but it was the kind of therapy that was like, okay, so you're depressed. Are you praying enough? Are you reading your scriptures enough? Are you faithful enough? Maybe you just don't have enough faith to be healed from this mental malady.
They're not helping you in any way, shape, or form.
Exactly. So I ended up going to those counseling sessions where, the dad was there and they were trying to convince us to either get married or give up the child for adoption. And I knew that I didn't want to marry him. I'd already made that decision and I was very stubborn. I was like, nope, I'm not doing that. But I also didn't want to give up my child. I was like, it would be easier for me to cut a hole right here and just hand you this. I couldn't do it. And so I made the horribly rebellious decision that I was going to keep the child. And I made this plan for myself to move away from my parents and to, get a job close to the school so I didn't need a car, and to get a job that had health insurance so I could have the baby. Like, I had this whole plan planned out and everything. And I didn't tell my parents at first. Obviously, the way they found out is sort of horrifying, honestly. So I should say, I didn't tell them. I just made this whole plan on my own. And I went to an OBGYN that was recommended to me by a friend. This was part of my plan. I was just going to have the baby and just go away quietly. Well, after my first visit, the OBGYN sent a letter to my home that was addressed to me. And I don't have the same name as anybody in my family, just so that you know. But there was the positive result of my pregnancy test and a plan for going forward. And my mother opened the letter because it was from an OBGYN. She was like, "This is to my daughter. It's an OBGYN. What's happening?" No idea in her mind of like, maybe she went to get a physical or anything like that. It was like, whatever.
Never mind that you're an adult and it's an offense to open mail in North America. I don't care if you're in Canada or the US, you don't open someone else's mail. I've been there with my own mother, not with pregnancy, but there's stuff she shouldn't have been.
Right. Plus there's, HIPAA violations and all of that. Anyway, so she confronted me. I confirmed what she thought, and she just told me, you need to go talk to your bishop. So that's how I got involved with the whole the LDS Family Services thing. And my bishop basically, he was a good man. He was very kind, but he was towing the Mormon line of basically telling me like I needed to repent and there was going to be a disciplinary council. And I ended up getting disfellowshipped from the church, which at the time meant that I couldn't speak, pray, or sing in a public meeting. And I couldn't take the sacrament, which was a huge embarrassing thing because they're passing the sacrament openly during church services and everybody sees you not take it. And then they speculate about why. So that was pretty traumatic for me. Also because I was constantly singing in church, like all the time people were asking me. And now I had to tell them, I'm sorry, no, I can't, which went totally against my people pleaserness anyway. And to not be able to explain a reason was so hard for me to mess with mentally, So, but I ended up getting past
persecution while you were in the church, because like you said, every time you went, people would see, and it would be like ripping the Band-Aid off again. More and more gossip and chitter chatter and whatever else. And it was not quite the same with the Catholic Church, but I no longer identify being Catholic. I believe for myself, it's God, whatever. I always respect everybody else's beliefs, but I always say if God is our Father and he's everywhere, why do I need to go to a special building to have a relationship? No judgment with anybody else, but that's just my own belief system.
Right. Yeah. And then, in my parents' congregation, every time that I went to their congregation, I was always known as the unwed mother. And, I wasn't allowed to have a baby shower. And I was, even today, I know that there are people in my parents' congregation from back then who still always have seen me as the unwed mother. You know, that was just like what it was. So fast forward just a little bit, I was about probably 4.5 months pregnant. I had gotten a job with health insurance, like I was doing my plan, even though my parents found out. And I met another man, and I had abandonment issues, so I always had to be with someone. And he seemed really kind. He seemed very interested in listening to what I had to say, which was new for me. And he was willing to go out on a date with me, even though he knew that I was pregnant with someone else's baby. And that sort of ranked pretty high in my book. And we ended up dating, and then we moved in together, and then the baby was born, and he always treated her like he was her own child. He was always very good to her. There was never any question about whether or not, like, that he was going to treat her differently because it wasn't his own child. He was so good to her. We ended up being married for 22 years. We had 5 more children together, and some of that time was happy. I do have a lot of happy memories of, you know, my kids young and all the fun that I loved. I loved having that many kids. I know a lot of people probably think it's horrible, but
I would have had 12 if I could. If I was so lucky to have the 2 that I had. I was always told I would never be able to have children, so I hear you.
Now I said 12, but in reality, 6 was enough. 6 was too many.
I marvel at what you do with 6. I have a special needs adult child. My youngest, he'll probably pop in here. Doesn't care once I'm off the podcast, but schedule. He's got severe autism, so
yeah. Yeah. And the thing is, though, I love my children. I would never trade having them. I would never trade the time that we had together. But if I had had just a minute to think about my life, would I have jumped into a marriage with this person? If I had felt confident enough in myself to provide for my child and to provide for my own emotional needs, would I have jumped into a marriage with them? Probably not. Would I have then gone on to have more and more and more children? Probably not, because what ended up happening was that, I mean, he wasn't a member when I married him, but my parents didn't care this time because they just wanted me to be married because that would right the wrong of having a baby out of wedlock. He did visit with the missionaries, several sets of missionaries. Shortly after the birth of my second child, our first together, he did decide to get baptized into the LDS faith. He was an active, faithful member for about 4 months.
well,
and then, yeah,
I'm going to stop you for a second,
okay,
because you know what it is, right? And when you're a people pleaser, like I'm telling you right now, if I had gotten pregnant out of wedlock, I would have been out on the street on my own, disowned. Like it was the biggest shame. My mother always told the story that I was born premature and that they never got married in a church. They eloped because the families were fighting. The families had nothing to fight about. They were poor. My parents eloped at 17 and my dad was just over 18. And I'm born 7.5 months later, 7.5 pounds, 20 inches long. And I worked in the NICU. I can tell you it was not premature, but to this day, my mother will tell people that. So my whole
7.5 pounds, that's pretty good for a preemie.
But my whole point is that I think many a woman in your situation would have done the same. We all would have thought, what an incredible man. And I know you didn't say he wasn't an incredible man, but the fact that, you know, he treated your daughter as his own. And it sounds like with having 6 children, and we know if you're a mother, and I'm not shading anybody that's not, what my point is, you put yourself last. So it sounds like you didn't even barely have time to breathe, you know? And so I hear you. And I wanted to add that because I think that I would have done the same. And I'm sure many women would have been in the same situation.
Yeah. Thank you. And I don't blame younger me. There was a time when I used to say if I had a time machine, I would absolutely use that one thing to go back and give 20-year-old me a good hard slap in the face. But that
Yeah,
was
but
at a
then you
time
might
when I
not
wasn't very
have.
compassionate.
Yeah, but then
What?
you might not have these children that
Yes,
you have,
exactly.
and that's
Yeah,
why I think I didn't know we were gonna talk about this, but when I said at the beginning, we need to embrace it all
yeah,
because it brings us to where we are today and who's in our life and the good parts of people that because children, I mean, I don't know, I always say because people have asked me that, "If you had a time machine, would you go back and what would you change?" And I say, "Nothing,"
yeah,
because it made me not that I think I'm so incredible, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is I wouldn't have my kids. I
yeah,
wouldn't have had the experiences that I had. I don't know. It's a proverbial question people always get
right.
asked, right? But I appreciate though you said you would have gone back and give yourself a good hard slap. I hear you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, thinking about it now, you know, would I have had that many kids that close together when we didn't really have money or resources, when he wasn't really very supportive of, you know, of showing up as a dad and all that kind of stuff? Like, no, I would not have. I only say that because for my own daughters, I'm so grateful that at this time I only have one grandchild. I'm so grateful for him. I love him. He's 4 years old,
Mhm.
but my daughter, you know, waited until she really found somebody she was very compatible with, and she got married, and they were thoughtful about having a child, and then they had a child, and they've been thoughtful about whether or not to have another child. And for me, it was not a thought. It was, if I marry this person, that will right the wrong of me having a baby out of wedlock. And if I have more children, I'll be more acceptable, because the thinking, and this is actually kind of a sick thing to think when you really think about it, but in Mormonism, the idea is there are all these spirit children in heaven. They're waiting to come to earth. And if you have a child, they're going to be born to a Mormon family. They're going to have the truth. If they go to some other family, they're going to struggle. They're not going to have the truth. They're not going to have the full light. And so the idea is like, have as many kids as you can, because then you'll be bringing spirit children into the truth rather than letting them go somewhere
I'm
that they
glad you
don't.
shared that because I'd never heard that quite before. So I get it. I get.
It's not like it's ever taught as doctrine, but it's one of those things that people talk about sort of on the sidelines and in the wings. And I even there's a lady in my congregation who had 11 boys, and
Mhm.
then she had, or no, sorry, she had 9 boys and then she had 2 girls. And that was what she kind of said, is that she and her husband decided they would just have as many children as the Lord would allow them to have.
Mhm. And we've heard that.
And you know, that's just what you do. So you get all of these sort of
My
messages that are
dad
spoken
is
on the
one of
sidelines.
17 children, and apparently my grandmother was pregnant every year for 25 years. Good French Canadian Roman Catholic family. 17 children in this little tiny house that is barely still standing. My grandmother was absolutely a miserable woman. I could see
Yeah.
why
Mhm.
now, but like my dad told stories of kids 5 people sleeping in one bed, and, like, your if whatever you owned, what little you owned,
Yeah.
you literally wore it or slept with it, or it was no longer yours, so I hear you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, I went on, put my head down, had a bunch of children, did the best I could. I sort of started having awakening when my oldest daughter was 7, um, then my son was 4,
Mhm.
my next daughter was 2, and I had a newborn at home. So I had 4 kids under, you know, 7 and under, and only one of them was in school, and my spouse at the time was starting a business, and so he was, like, locked in a bedroom of our house for, like, 12 to 15 hours a day working on that, and expecting me to keep the kids quiet so that he could make phone calls and all that kind of stuff. It was a miserable time. I was
Honey,
frustrated, I was angry, I was, you know, I was really upset, and I remember, getting really, really angry with my one of my kids, I can't remember which one, over something that was really inconsequential, but I lost it. Like, I flew completely off the handle. Um, and I remember, and my mom spanked me, so I spanked my kids. That's the way we did it. And after spanking this child, I had this realization that I wasn't punishing that child. I was just angry. And I was taking my anger out on my child. And I was like, what am I doing? I don't want to be this kind of parent. And I remember thinking, like, I didn't love my parents. I feared them.
Yep.
I feared what would happen if I didn't toe the line.
Mhm.
And I feared
I
what,
knew what would happen if I
well,
didn't go the line.
exactly. I had plenty of experience with what would happen. And so I feared them, and there was no love connection. There was no sense of belonging to them. It was just that they were the people who were in the house that I had to tiptoe around so that I could eke out my little life until I could leave, you know. But after I got married and had children, and they saw that I was trying to repair my life, we sort of glossed over all of those things and, you know, went right back into being a family system. And I had Sunday dinner at my mom's house almost every single night for years and years and years. They were there for every birthday, every holiday. You know, it was like we were together all the time. I talked to my mom all day, every day. Um, and so there was still that influence of her over my parenting. And so when I had this realization, I just said, I don't want my children to fear me. I want them to not only love me, but I want them to know that I love them. I want them to know that no matter what they do, that I'm going to love them. And no matter who they become or who they are, it's like I wanted to give my kids the things that I didn't have emotionally growing up. Um, and so I started to make some changes, and I tried really hard to be better in that way, to relate better with my kids. But I recognized too that I had some limitations because I would get triggered, and because things that my spouse would do would trigger me, and, you know, things he would say would trigger me. And I was so confused about what I was trying to do and what I was feeling, and the inability to overcome those feelings in favor of doing healthy things for my children. But I sort of just did the best I could, and I just kept on that trajectory. I always had to have some kind of side hustle because the business never made enough. And eventually we declared bankruptcy. And through all this time, I managed to get a bachelor's degree. And then a few years after we declared bankruptcy, I went back to get my master's degree. And I ended up becoming a professional opera singer. And
Oh,
um,
wow.
I taught voice lessons at the high school, and I also sang professionally. And I started to have a little bit of success. But then as an opera singer, you know, you can't just park yourself in a place and sing until you've already been successful everywhere else. So I would go out to auditions in different places in Texas. I would be away from the family and the kids for a few days at a time. And my spouse was like not okay with that. So the more successful that I got, the less he wanted me to go do those things. And I was like, but this is the only money we're really earning. So I eventually got to the point where I had to make a decision. I was either going to go to New York and do more auditions, because that's what you would do as a singer. You would go to New York twice a year and sing for all the companies and then see who gave you jobs.
Right.
So I was either going to do that again, or I was going to go get my teaching certificate over the summer and become a choir teacher. And so I tried. I did that instead. I made the decision to stop singing professionally, which was kind of heartbreaking for me because I'd put so much work into it. But I was so
And
much
you had
happier.
to be good. When you're making money at that, you were good.
Well, it wasn't a lot of money,
Yeah,
but I
but the
was
fact
working.
still, like my brother's a musician. He sings. He says he never knew he could sing till he started yelling at his own kids. I don't know how you make that. My brother went the way of my parents. I always say I didn't get a lot of stuff from my mother, but the one thing I learned was how to be a better parent, not
Mm,
do the things she did. And I swore up and down that I would never, and this is with no judgment to anybody else at all, but I was always so afraid. So I never did spank my children. I've never yelled at them. But what I've done is when I'm angry, turn it inwards, right?
yeah,
Because you can't not get angry with children when
right.
you're a parent. There's no way you can. And most parents I have found when, like, you didn't know any better, right? That's how you were raised. So you raised your children the way your role model showed you. But like, you know what you did was you looked at it and you went, this doesn't feel right. I'm not really even angry at them. I'm just angry and I
Yeah.
right. And that's usually what comes out.
Yeah.
So I hear you. You know what? Such beautiful comments here that people are sharing, your people, my people that are here, anybody that's tuning in. And I got to say, I really appreciate all your honesty and sharing this story, because from the amount of comments, people are really resonating, and that's what they need to hear, is realism, and how you rose from where you're moving forward. I know too, from the marriage that you were in to how you ended up on your healing journey. And I think it's so important for people to hear this. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for letting me share so openly. And, um, you
I'll
know,
have you on again if you want to come back. I have a feeling I'm going to hear from a lot of people that are going to say, bring Megan back on.
I'd be happy to. Yeah. So let's see, where was I? Oh yeah. So I got my teaching certificate, and that turned out to be a good thing, because then I was off when my kids were off. I had the kind of hours that were better for my kids, and I was able to really be present for them. I started teaching at the high school that my kids were attending. And so that was such a huge blessing, because I could be there, right there with them. I could meet all their teachers and talk to them. We had lunch together occasionally. So it was really wonderful. It ended up being the best, 15-ish years of my life teaching there. So I was kind of getting to a place where I felt like things were finally starting to piece together. And my dad called me one day, and he said, "Hey, I'd like to take you out to lunch." He left me a voicemail. He said, I want to talk to you about some things." And I was like, "Nope, sure don't. I don't want to talk about anything." I was like, "I'll go to lunch with you, but I don't want to talk about anything." I was like, "Look, we're in a good place. We have a decent relationship. I don't live with you anymore. Things are fine. Let's just be fine." um, and he called me a few more times, and I couldn't really dodge him anymore. And so I called my sister, and I was like, "What is this about?" And she said, "Well, Dad wanted to talk to all of us about the kind of dad he was, um, and why he did things the way he did. And it turned out to be a good conversation. So I think you should sit down with him." And I was like,
But I
"Okay."
don't want to open that can of worms.
Yeah, I really did not. I was like so happy with my dissociation. Although I still was deeply depressed. I still was deeply unhappy. I knew that my marriage was not good. I knew that I wasn't being treated well, but I didn't know what to do about it, because it was what I had always known. It was very familiar. So I just kept going and kept going.
And it seemed
Oh,
to kind of plateau, something you could manage, hold all the balls up in the air,
yep,
and you didn't need something else, another ball thrown in there or anything, right? Like you could
right,
manage this. It didn't mean that you were really super happy or exactly what you said, but you could manage it, right?
right,
Mm-hmm.
right. So I
Mm-hmm.
went to that lunch with my dad, and that conversation changed my life, because
Wow.
um, he basically was in he was in a church addiction recovery program, which, don't read anything into this. Nothing he shared with me that day indicated that he had any kind of an addiction at all.
Yes,
But
I know from following some of the stories out there, like watching one PORN video means you had an addiction from Jody,
exactly.
and
Yep.
Jody, what was her name? Yes, I've
Jody
heard.
Hildebrandt
Yes.
was instrumental in designing the addiction recovery program that the LDS Church still uses to this day. And most of the men in the church, if they've been in the church for more than 5 or 10 years, have been through that program, and it's still a program that is used today. It's still very, very harmful. I had a conversation on my channel with a wonderful man this morning. His name is Tommy Johnson. He goes by the Tomsters, and I wanted to hear his perspective. And that was a lot of what we talked about, is how much shame there was put on the men for completely normative behaviors. So
Yeah, it
anyway,
doesn't mean you have an addiction. And for the people maybe across the pond or whoever's listening, and you don't know who Jody Hildebrandt is, I encourage you, if you're open to it, to the world of true crime, to look up Ruby Frankie and Jody Hildebrandt. I'm going to warn you with a trigger warning that it involves a child, abuse, from their own mother and Jody Hildebrandt. But this is where this is coming from. And this is why I knew exactly what you were talking about from the addiction program, that it
yeah,
didn't mean anybody had an addiction problem.
right. Right. So the lunch was sort of his make amends step in the 12-step program.
Mhm.
And what he really did though was just kind of overshare about some of his issues and
Yeah, TMI dad, right?
right, and try to use that sort of as a way of explaining why he wasn't the greatest dad,
Mhm.
and why he wasn't really connected to us and why he didn't really um, it's not that he didn't spend time with us because he did, but he wasn't present, even when he was home, kind of thing. And there was a lot of anger and there was a lot of shame and controlling behavior and all of that kind of stuff. So in the moment, all I could do was again dissociate, put on my people pleaser hat, and say, you know what, Dad, I think you and Mom just did the best that you could with what you had, and I don't blame you for anything, and we're good.
Mhm.
This is all good. And I left the lunch. I went back to my job at the school.
Mhm.
And then I went home and I couldn't get out of bed for 3 days.
Oh my goodness.
And I still stand by part of what I said. I don't blame my parents. I do believe that they were doing the best that they could with what they had. If I do have one complaint, it's that they didn't try to do anything different when they saw that it wasn't working.
Agreed. And I've heard from friends that have said that coming from this type of situation. And I had a hard time for a long time accepting that too with my
Yeah.
own. It was mainly my mother. My father enabled her. But my point was, she didn't do any of the sexual abuse, but
Hmm.
it was physical, emotional, verbal, whatever it was, right? And to me, I think the inner anger that I was never comfortable expressing. That's why that you guys, we may not get to talk too much. We're already at 7:22, and I've been so engrossed. I'm not usually this quiet, but I'm listening because your story was really resonating with a lot of people. Not that we've lived your story, but similar things we've gone through.
Yeah.
And the thing is that to be able to say to a parent, and yes, now I can say, yes, they did the best, my own too, with what they had. They were young when they got married. There really wasn't a choice. I mean, 1965 was when I was born. So to be an unwed mother too, as well at that time, right?
Yeah.
And they didn't know any better. But
Yeah.
it took me a while to get there because I think you hit the nail on the head. What did you say? They didn't seek out any further than what they did do? Like that was enough, kind of, or am I wrong
Right.
with what I'm
No,
saying?
yeah, when they saw that things weren't working, when they
Yeah.
saw that there was so much anger and dysfunction in the family that they didn't try to find another way
Yes.
to do it differently. And I
Mhm.
guarantee you they had examples of their friends who didn't
Mhm.
as William is talking about,
Yep.
the belt was the way, right?
Uh-huh.
And I actually got to the point where I was too old for that. I thought it was kind of ridiculous that my father wanted to do that to a, tween age girl. And I
Mhm.
actually laughed at him, and that was the worst time. um, just because I was who I was, and I was like, this is ridiculous. And it like peeped out for a second there, and I paid for it. And later in therapy, I remember processing that as the moment that I decided to stay silent. And it took me a really long time until I was able to speak again. So me telling my story is um, kind of a, middle finger to that to that time where
Me
I
too.
decided
Because you
not to speak
started
anymore.
speaking out
Yeah.
finally. Nobody, even my relatives, had no idea what was going on in our house, for example. And I
Mhm.
always say this, that nobody knows what goes on behind closed doors, including when we see people maybe that we aren't treated with respect or whatever. We're allowed to have boundaries, yes, but I
Mhm.
always say it's not my job to judge. And of course, I try not to, but there's no way you can't. Sometimes you're a human being, right?
Yeah.
The thing is, we don't know what they've gone through their lifetime either
Right.
to be able to be the person they are that they're presenting. So that's where coming in, holding space and having grace and what. But if you come on the next time, I hope you will. We can go from there, but please continue. So you were in bed.
Sure, sure, sure. Yeah, so I admitted to myself, I started having panic attacks every time I had to be around my parents, and I was not able to function. I could not just put one foot in front of the other anymore. And I finally decided to get help from a therapist that was not affiliated with the church.
Mhm.
And the ironic thing is that I went into my therapist saying, I need to repair my relationship with my parents because I don't understand why I keep getting triggered every time I have to go see them. And so that the ironic thing is like that was, like up here on the surface, and there were like 29,000 other layers that needed to be addressed. So, going to therapy was the first time that I learned how to be compassionate to myself. It was the first time that I learned how to do self-care, because up to that point, I felt like that was very selfish for me to take any time or resources just for myself. I remember sort of recounting to my therapist in that first marathon session where you kind of dump stuff. I was so upset by it. And she said, did your parents ever, comfort you physically? And I was like, nope. I would get a kiss on the forehead or a side hug. And she said, it's okay for you to comfort yourself. You can just put your hands on the sides of your face and just hug yourself that way. You can put your hands on the sides of your neck and just relax this way. And I could not do it. I could not even touch the sides of my face with compassion because I didn't know how to do that. That's how bad it was.
I still don't like to be touched.
Yeah.
I don't like, don't get me wrong. But I'm very respectful, even with my boys, even as adults, as children, I would always ask them before I did. But when I'm out, and we've all run into people, some people are more touchy than others. And, you'd be talking to someone, they'll keep touching you. And I literally just, it's so hard not to cringe.
Yeah.
I just don't like it. Yeah. It's foreign, isn't it? It's foreign.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. When you're not used to being touched affectionately, when you're used to being touched only when there is SA involved, that it's really, really hard to allow even yourself to touch yourself in a compassionate, loving way. But what was interesting is that through that therapy, I started learning things about coercive control, and I started learning about just behaviors that are manipulative and problematic and everything. And I remember her showing me this wheel of coercive control, and it talked about all the different areas in which you could be controlled. There was financial control and isolation and verbal and all of these different things. And I remember
fear must be on there, because fear is a big one,
yes,
right?
Yes. And I remember looking at this wheel and going, oh my gosh, I'm in an abusive marriage. Which hadn't been addressed up to that point at all. It was all just like focusing on how do I get back into, being the good girl for my parents and being acceptable to my parents. And so
plus, were you taught to, I didn't mean to stop you, but were you taught to, like I know I was, you were in an abusive marriage if your spouse hit you physically.
Yeah.
Like nothing else was considered abusive. And I still have a hard time personally when you think about, well, they didn't hit me.
Yeah.
Right? They didn't hit me, so I wasn't abused. Right? Because it's been programmed into you. So I hear
totally
that realization.
It does. And even the couple of instances where there was physical altercation and I ended up injured and hurt and everything, it was like the whole forgive and forget mantra. And I told him, you need to get help. And he said, okay, I will. And I said, good, go. And after you go, then I'll come back with the kids. And so he went to an appointment, and I said, okay, do you have a plan? Like, is this going to be, do you have a regular schedule? And he shared with me the schedule and the plan and everything. And I said, okay. So I went back, and it never did happen again.
Changes once they're back in your good graces. It's old patterns fall back in.
Right.
And I want to just share this one thing. I don't mean to keep interrupting, but because people are saying I'm learning so much right now. And I knew this is going to help a lot of people.
Yeah.
But what I came to the realization with my family And even with relationships with a partner, is that you know what, you can't force anybody to change. Change only comes from within, or you come to the realization you need to change. So when you're in a partnership or a family, and I'm not telling people to leave whomever's around them, but for myself, it came to the realization that the only thing I could change is myself, and how I chose to interact, or who I chose to have in my life. But
Yeah.
again, therapy, somebody put higher, therapy is a good step to start healing the trauma. It sure is. Please, sorry, go ahead, continue.
Yeah.
Please.
So, I coming to that realization, I immediately went to my bishop because I was like, what do I do? And luckily at the time I had a really compassionate bishop, and he was very, very kind. And he had known some of the things that had happened because he was the one I called when I had to like leave with my kids and stuff like that.
I can't imagine. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. So when I went to him and told him that, of course he wasn't surprised. The only person that didn't know that was me. And he said, you know what? I know that you're a really faithful woman, and I trust that you will make the right decision. And there was no underlying pretext to that. He was not trying to secretly tell me that I had to stay. He was really actually being supportive of me. And I could tell that in the moment in the conversation. And I'm so grateful to him. He's one of the few people in the church who behaved that way. And I was so grateful for him. And his wife as well was just a stellar woman, and so kind and so accepting and loving. And I get emotional talking about them because it's so hard for me to see good people like that still in the system, being deceived by the system. For another time. But anyway,
I'm sure we're going to have a lot. Like I said, I knew you coming on here, and we haven't even got into the incredible work that you're doing, and I know we will, but I think it was important for you to, and again, I'm not trying to put pressure on you, but I think like a lot of the people that normally listen to my show too, I can, from their comments, you're really helping a lot of people by sharing your story. So I really appreciate your honesty.
So, yeah. So I prayed about it, and I felt like God was telling me to stay. And so I stayed, and I continued to pray about it for another 10 years. And we went through a few rounds of marriage counseling, and I finally did, through this therapy, I finally did learn some boundaries, and I learned some self-prioritization for the first time. And we were in marriage counseling, and I was starting to recognize unhealthy patterns that kept coming up over and over. And we were about a year into our third round of marriage counseling, and it wasn't going well. Nothing was changing. We were talking about symptoms, but never the root causes. And when I brought up those physical altercations that had happened 10 years ago, his comment was like, it was years ago. Can we just not let it go? And the other comment was like, I was drunk and I don't even really remember what happened, kind of thing.
Yeah, but you do.
Yeah. So I remember leaving those couple of sessions being incredibly depressed, and I just wanted time by myself. And after taking that time to step away, I just had this realization, like, this is never going to change. Like, we're stuck in this cycle that keeps going over and over, and it's never going to change because he's not willing to change. I'm changing, I'm working, but he's still in the same place. And so I sort of confronted him with that. And I said, I just feel like it's never going to change, and I can't do another cycle again. Like, I've done as many cycles as I can. I'm at the very edge of the cliff, and I can't go any farther. And I said, I'm just done. And he said, well, we have another appointment tomorrow. Will you just go with me to the appointment, and let's talk to the counselor? And, if that's your decision at the end of the session, then fine, but let's at least go. So we went to the session in separate cars because I insisted, because I knew what the outcome was going to be already. I was not going to change my mind. And what's really interesting is that when I made that decision, I actually I fasted and prayed, because that's what good Mormon people do when they have a big decision to make, is that you fast for 24 hours and then you pray. And if you can imagine somebody who is food and water deprived having a spiritual experience, that's kind of where it comes from, right? Is like you're sort of dizzy and you don't feel great. And so you kind of think that you're getting a revelation of some kind. But I did feel like I fasted and I prayed and I said, I've decided I can't do it anymore. And I think that you'll understand. And I felt so peaceful when I finally said that out loud, that I was like, this is definitely the right thing for me to do. Because I didn't feel conflicted. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel like I was doing this out of revenge or anything. I just felt peaceful. So we went in separate cars to the appointment. It was February 14th.
Oh, wow.
And we sat there and, on this little tiny sofa in the office, and I just said, I'm done. I can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, do you think that there's any circumstances under which we could reconcile? And my people pleaser brain turned on and was like, well, if he did this, and if he did this, and if he did this, then, maybe if he went to individual therapy at the same time we're doing couples therapy. And I started to work out that equation, and something just stopped me.
Oh, thank God.
For the first time in my life, I said no.
How did that feel? How did that feel when you said no finally and you meant it?
Strangely, I felt just a lot of grief, because it was sad. It's just sad. And I felt sorry for him. I felt sad for him, because I knew that he was always going to be stuck there in that same place. And he had this, forgive me, but incredible wife who was incredibly loyal and incredibly committed to making it work at all costs. Mm-hmm. And these incredible children who loved him, and he took it with both hands and threw it away.
I completely understand. Again, not the same life, but I didn't have an abusive husband, but he was never there.
Yeah.
For 12 years, I begged him, and he could never hug our eldest child, tell him he loved him. I had my son eldest in counseling for years, because never mind that my youngest needed a lot of my time. And I was off with a back injury. I mean, I was doing the best that I could. And, we all tell ourselves these stories that, I used to think I had a perfect marriage, because in 17 years of marriage, I only had one fight. Yeah. That means nobody's communicating when they're still
Exactly.
And then when I did finally split up with him, and I hear what you're saying, right? I begged him to go for counseling, to go get help. I think you're severely depressed, like really. And he would tell the counselor all these things. Yeah, I'll do it. Never did it.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't do it anymore. And when I went to a counseling session, it's not my son's fault. Ever. He doesn't watch my show, but if you ever heard this, is not because of him, but it was a deciding factor. When I went to a counseling session with my eldest son, and she asked him, how does your dad make you feel? And he said, I think he said something to the effect of, I'm just nothing but an irritant. And I mean, not like that's how he felt. And I realized, I can't keep doing this to my kid, never mind to myself. And then when you walk away, you realize, holy cow, it's not as difficult as I thought it was going to be, because you were doing the bulk of the work, right? Like you said, incredible woman, and too little, too late, right? Like, he's willing to do all this stuff for you, but you couldn't do it anymore. You were done. Like, if you could only have done it before. Am I right or am I wrong?
No, that's totally right. And there also was this pattern of me asking for help, and me asking for change, and me advocating for more involvement, and all of those things. And sometimes he would agree, and it would be better for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, and then it would go right back to where it was before. And then I was less able to ask for help, because I didn't want to be rejected that way again, And so it was this vicious cycle. And so when we finally did decide to get divorced, we did this thing where I didn't want my kids to be totally uprooted from everything in their lives. So we decided to rent a little 1-bedroom apartment, furnish it very sparsely, and we were the ones who switched back and forth. So the only difference for my kids was that only one parent would be home at a time. So they got to stay in their rooms, in their beds, in their schools, with their friends, in the house they grew up in, on the street they lived on. And he and I switched back and forth. And he took the first week, and then, on every Sunday night, I would pack up my stuff and I would go to the apartment. And it was the first time in my entire life that I had ever been alone, and I had to learn how to do that.
Yeah,
I had to learn how to not have my children as a responsibility, but also as a distraction from working on my own issues. So I continued in therapy, and it was really great for the kids. We did that for the whole first year, and it was great for them to not be so traumatized by everything. It was still incredibly hard for them, but without the addition of them having to pack up their stuff and go to a foreign place and all of that mess that went with it. I wish that I had been more vocal about that and told more people how to make that work, because I think it spared my children from a lot, even though it was still really hard.
People are saying, and I'm thinking the same thing too, that's a wonderful workaround. Megan, Stephanie K sending you hearts. And I'm just marveling at it, because I know it couldn't have been easy on the two of you, but despite your differences, your children came first. And I commend you on that, because wow, there's a lot of people that couldn't do that. So
yeah, and it won't work for everybody, because especially if you're, if you're dealing with a narcissist or somebody else who has a personality disorder, truly, this would not work 100%. And I have to say, I had to exercise an incredible amount of restraint on myself, because, I could have put itching powder in the bed sheets, or saran wrap on the toilet or something, and I had those thoughts. Trust me, I had those thoughts.
Oh yeah,
all the time. But we restrained ourselves, and we were adults, at least for that moment.
Well, I commend you on it, because that's
really
creative.
But I got to the end of what my therapist could help me with, because we got to the point where, okay, I had some skills and tools, but I still had all of this trauma underlying, and I knew that it was trauma, and I knew I was having more and more nightmares about it, and I was putting more and more pieces together. And so I went and researched different trauma therapies, and that's when I found EMDR.
That is where I wanted to go. You know what? We've got about maybe 7 minutes left. So you know what though? And again, I'm not putting pressure on you, but you are helping so many people, and I really want them to hear about this. I'd love to have you come back and talk more about this and your work you're doing, because you are doing incredible work, but please continue.
Yeah, I will come back for sure. But EMDR literally saved my life. For those who don't know, it's a trauma-based healing modality. It stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And the way it worked for me is that I held these little pulsars in my hand, and they would alternate electric pulses that I would just feel a gentle pulse.
Didn't you say it right? Maybe I missed that. Sorry, I was highlighting a comment. But didn't you say the reason why some of the science showed that it actually replicates REM sleep with the eye movements?
Yeah. So
go ahead.
With your eyes closed, it replicates that back and forth eye movement of REM sleep, and it literally carves new neural pathways in your brain so that it removes the negative feelings from the traumatic experience. And it's the reason why I can talk in great detail about my trauma, and I could tell you literally everything. Nobody would want to hear that, but I could do it, because I have a new neural pathway now where I can think about the traumatic experience and remember everything about it, but I don't have any negative feelings associated with it. And it was a way of helping me reframe, because it's not the traumatic experience that damages you. It's what you believe about yourself because of the traumatic experience. And so I developed all these negative beliefs about myself, that I wasn't powerful, that I wasn't worthy, that I wasn't deserving of good treatment. And so what EMDR did for me is help reinstall a new operating system, remove the one that I got when I was 7 years old, remove the one that I got from my family of origin, remove the one that I got in my religious indoctrination, and replace it with positive beliefs that I have about myself. And I think the episode you listened to was, it was either self or parts.
Self. It was self.
Self.
It was the one you did 4 days ago. I don't
Yeah.
normally go and watch say people's podcasts and stuff, but I wanted to know a little bit more about you, and I knew we weren't going because it wasn't your story, and I know that people are getting to know you and then be able to discover you because of the work that you're doing. But
Yeah.
I knew instinctively we were going to be talking about your story and the work you're doing, because I think it's going to help so many people. So I
Yeah.
watched it and I just went, wow, this is so powerful. So I got goosebumps as I'm telling you, thinking
Yeah.
about it. Go ahead. Sorry.
That's okay. So the episode about self is actually a concept from internal family systems therapy, which is a different healing modality, but it basically introduces the concept that we all have a self with a capital S. It is our highest, best, truest, most authentic version of ourselves. And that version, or that core part of us, cannot be harmed and knows exactly what it needs to be healed. And I experienced that in EMDR, where the therapist would stop me from time to time, say, "What do you notice now? What do you notice now?" And there was a point where I said, "Don't stop me. I know what I need to do. Just let it run." And it would just go, and I would install the beliefs that I needed to install. I would do the work that I needed to do, like burning down houses and ripping things out, and just putting the belt through a shredder and things like that. Just things that I knew were going to banish those bad feelings forever, and then reinstalling these beliefs that I already know about myself, that I am powerful, that I am capable, that I know how to heal, that I'm not broken, all of those things. And that is now what I believe about myself. And I would leave those sessions sometimes after EMDR feeling like a freaking rock star, like I was on top of the world,
Because you
because
are.
because for the first time I wasn't saddled with this negative belief that wasn't really mine. It was sort of given to me as a parting gift from all of these traumatic things. And so it's what enabled me to want to get my story out, to write the book, to talk about healing. And now the podcast that I do is called the Midlife Revolution. And a lot of people think about midlife as a certain age, but I think of it as the time when we're willing to hit the big red stop button on the treadmill of life that we've been on, the treadmill of other people's expectations, and finally say, no, this is my life. And I'm going to change these little things so that I can have the kind of life that I want. And I started noticing that these little tiny changes that I was making were creating these huge ripples in my life. And so I start the podcast with how to be alone, because that was the first real lesson that I learned. And I've been very intentional with taking the podcast through the different ways that I healed and the different concepts that I've learned. And I'm almost at the end of that little section, which is going to be called season 1. I've got one more episode I want to do there. And then the next session is those were all solo sessions. The next season is going to be duets. And I haven't even told my people this yet. But the next probably 15 episodes are going to be duets with other people who have other tools and resources and other stories that we'll dig into. So.
Well, I think it is incredible. You guys, and a lot of your people are here, and you can tell they're an amazing community. The Angel Rock community has been great. You guys are all playing nice in the sandbox, but I knew you would. I knew you would. Just great people here. They're all your people are going on about how incredible your podcast is. And I'm telling y'all, listen, I tell you the truth. I literally finished watching her episode on self. I think it was episode 9. Is that what it was called?
Yep.
Yeah. And I was like, wow. But I always start at the beginning. I'm not usually this quiet on podcasts, but I really felt with your honesty and with sharing your story, There's so many people that can resonate with. I'm sure you find in your own practice with what I do. A lot of people have woken up without defining what the last 4+ years have been. So if YouTube doesn't like it. But a lot of people have started to realize, why am I here? What am I doing? Why am I doing what I'm doing? I'm not happy, but it's status quo, so I continue. And a lot of people are starting to realize too, exactly what you said too, to be able to spend time on your own. I think people discovered how difficult that was, but
Yeah.
it's also important. It's when you get in touch with your higher self, or as you said, your true self,
Yeah.
and also meditation and the things. There's so many things we didn't touch on that I know we will. And I
Yeah.
appreciate you so much for being here. Everybody's going, love you, great story. Can't wait to check out. These are my peoples too. Going, can't wait
Yes.
to check out the podcast. So tell people what else have you got coming up? Where can they buy your book? How can they connect with you? Because I know this is your business as well with what you do. Whatever you want to share, please go ahead.
Yeah. Sure. Thank you. My book is called I Walked Through Fire to Get Here. It's available on Amazon and everywhere. I'm still working on the audiobook because I do have ADHD, and I started a podcast before I finished my audiobook. So the podcast is available everywhere you consume podcasts, but also on YouTube. My YouTube channel is also a place where I am building this community. And thank you to all my community members who are here tonight and for sharing and for supporting. Thank you so much. On my YouTube channel, every Monday morning, we do Monday morning motivation at 7 a.m., where we have positive affirmations and intentions for the week. And then every Wednesday, I do a premiere release of my podcast episode, followed by a live Q&A afterwards, where we talk about the episode and people share their experiences as well. And then every third Thursday, which should be this Thursday, I do a live Ask Me Anything. The last couple of ones have been all about the Daybell case, which is not my favorite topic, but I do engage in talking about that because my entire message is that we can have healthier family systems, we can have healthier religions, we can have healthier relationships, but it starts with us. We have to heal our own wounds first so that we don't go and hurt the other people in our lives. And so that's my podcast is all about healing, and my YouTube community is a little growing place where people can come and share and feel safe. And I do have to say, it's one of the kindest and most supportive chats I've ever seen. My comments section is like 99.9% positive. Not to say that we don't get trolls, because we do, but my people take care of it.
Absolutely. And Ashley's reminding, and the other people have to, please don't forget to hit the like button.
Oh, Ashley, thanks for being here. Thank you, mods.
I don't have a big YouTube channel, hoping to start working on it soon. But I know your people are here from there, and I appreciate that. Thank goodness, StreamYard, you cooperated. We were supposed to have problems going live on YouTube, so thank goodness it worked. Yeah. I want to thank you again, Megan, for being here, and I look forward to talking more about your work. And because I like I said, I totally resonated with your own. The last episode, what I had time to watch today, and I was so glad that I did the episode 9 on self. So you guys and all my people are going, I can't wait to check our podcast. So it's like, yes, please do.
Thank you.
Also, if you guys ever want to get a hold of me, I am working on a website. I do have one. I never give it out because it wasn't a domain name, and I'm revamping it. I'm going to be going to a domain name. Same thing with, I just always use facebook.com/Angel Rock. You can still get a hold of me on there. It talks about my services, but the fastest and easiest way to get a hold of me is through social media. I am on every single platform you could possibly think of. Facebook Messenger is usually the fastest, easiest way to get a hold of me. Also, don't forget to hang out with David and I this Thursday night with the thing at the foot of the bed, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I had a chat with Dave today. Now we're going to see where we're going to go with this, because things could shift. You never know. Or you guys might want something different to talk about. We always go where you guys want to talk. But I think we're going to talk about, a little bit of knowledge is dangerous sometimes. Sometimes you got to educate yourself a little bit more before, especially when we're dealing with the paranormal. And I say the paranormal is anything that people don't consider to be in the norm. It doesn't necessarily have to be ghosties or anything like that. It could be a lot of different things. Also, I got another great guest. I forgot to check who's coming on. I'm sorry. I forgot to check. I didn't forget with you. I remembered with you last week on Monday, and I told them we're not talking. I already knew before I talked to you, because I know this work that you've done and your life story can help so many people. So again, don't forget 2 groups on Facebook: Paranormal University for all things paranormal, the Angel Rocker Tribe for many of the spiritual and healing things that we talk about on this show as well. Also, don't forget David and I's group, The Thing at the Foot of the Bed. And it's with Lorilei, Potvin, and David Hansel. We get to 200 people. We're going to be going live in there. So we're getting there, you guys. It's not that old yet. So again, Megan, thank you so much for being here. And
Thank you, Lorilei.
Did you mention your website? I don't think you did.
My website is third-verse.com, as in this is the third verse of my song. And
Yes.
I do have coaching resources and other things there as well.
Yes, definitely. Okay, you guys, we love y'all. We'll see you on Thursday, and we'll see you next week, same time, same space. And I look forward to it. Again, thank you. Thank you. It was so nice to meet all of Megan's community here too. I hope you'll stick around. We have fun on this show too. All right, take care. We'll talk to you soon.